What's up? Lindsay Rhodes and Sam Bruchhaus here with another edition of the SumerSports show. We've got a lot to talk about with some major signings from a financial standpoint, people that are staying put in Cincinnati, contracts that we need to discuss, Sam. And also, it's been a week since the bulk of the free agency frenzy happened. And so we've had a chance to kind of take a lot of that in. And I think that we've got some thoughts, some wide receiver data that we want to mull around a little bit. We are, of course, still waiting on some free agency moves. Rodgers, we're waiting on you. How is that what we're doing? I don't know, Sam, but that's what we're doing. What?
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Rodgers has been in what the media has called toxic relationships for the past, 3 years. And apparently John Cena is now in a toxic relationship as well.
We need to
So
talk about that.
I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. John Cena broke my heart a little bit, but I'm trying to stay away from the toxic relationships as some of the teams are with Aaron Rodgers. And so I'm excited to talk some wide receivers.
Did you just let's dive into that Cena thing for a minute. Did you enjoy his promo that he cut in Belgium? Because I saw a lot of reaction online that was like, oh, he's just spitting facts and this is all true. And I was like, whatever. Like, I thought that Cody Rhodes was right. He was a little whiny bitch. Like, I was like, this isn't you. What are we doing? What are we doing?
So I think it was a very utilitarian, I guess. It had like a defined use. They had to have John Cena walk out, and they had to have the people that were cheering him on, because everyone loves John Cena, boo him. And so the only way that they could do that in front of an international crowd, which was red
including
hot,
a little boy wearing John Cena gear head to toe.
Yes, would have been to have him go out and literally whine, because that's the best way to annoy people. It is.
You're right.
Hustle, loyalty, respect. Whining is his butt off, and so I think they literally like evaluated the situation, and especially looking at The Rock, he couldn't go out and be cool. He couldn't go out and inspire any excitement with the new music or new clothes or anything. He literally had to go out and be just an awful guy, a terrible guy, and moreover, an annoying guy, none of which he personally is in real life. And it worked like a charm. By the end, everyone was booing him. And so, I think the goal was to be like, oh, this isn't one of the best promos of all time. It was to get every crowd from now until WrestleMania to boo him out of the building.
I guess I wanted to boo. I was like, get this done. Mwah. Like, nothing worked out for you, John Cena. Holy hell, what are we talking about? What have you done for me? Anyway, it was really fun what's happening? How is this my life that this is something that you say, John Cena, and I'm like, let's go there instead of Aaron Rodgers. Although I will do anything to take a respite from an Aaron Rodgers conversation these days. Because I feel like it's like I've lived in the same data. I've made the same points. They've been over and over and over again. I guess there is, to a degree, though, what we're really looking at here with regards to at least the Steelers and the Giants waiting on him. The Vikings, that's a whole separate conversation. Maybe we should have it. Like, what could they possibly be thinking? What could this possibly tell us about JJ McCarthy? Is he unhealthy? Like, I don't see a scenario where it makes sense to put him in the same room as JJ McCarthy if they're going to start JJ McCarthy. I also don't think he would even want to go there. Like, why would he choose that over other options? Why would they start him over JJ McCarthy? I'm confused about that specific thing. And at the risk of going down the exact same road that I've gone down 800 times so far this season, I'm going to try not to do that. But what do you think they're thinking?
So I think if we're talking about the other teams, it's pretty clear. They just need a quarterback, and it's veteran.
There aren't many.
Yeah, there aren't many, and it's probably the safest to go veteran, maybe 2 veterans, frankly, and then go in the draft as well. If you just want to play all your cards.
Right.
The Vikings are an interesting one, and I tried to go through the steps of how this could occur. And it seems to just be an injury thing, because you start out at the evaluation. They took JJ McCarthy with a high pick.
Yeah.
They clearly liked him at that point. You start with the
Right.
preseason evaluation.
Remember when Harbaugh was saying he would have taken him number 1 overall? Like, he loved
Yeah.
him. Everyone else worked out. So now we're not going to go with him. Okay, continue. Sorry.
Right. You move to the preseason evaluation, and it seems as if the preseason evaluation was that he was going to start. I mean, he was throwing the ball around in the preseason, and then like it seemed like Sam Darnold was going to be the backup and he was going to start. Then he gets hurt. So that leads me to believe that there's clearly some complications with the injury, which is a little confusing. Like that had been rumbling about. Who knows? But like,
Okay,
is
time
there
out.
some
Why? If there's a setback with the injury, why did they just let Sam Darnold walk? Like, just like, that's fine. They could have done so many. They could have tagged him and just had him for a year. They could have
Right.
tagged him to try and tag and trade him. And then they have someone else over a barrel and they can get something at least for him. They made no effort whatsoever to re-sign Sam Darnold, a guy who clearly another team thought was valuable enough to bring in and have, get rid of your viable starter, in my opinion, to bring him in. Like that didn't even seem to be on the radar for them. So I don't know that I'm buying that specifically, unless it's a new twist,
Right.
a new setback with the injury. I mean, like a real new setback with the injury. And maybe that's why they're entering the fray at this point in time. And they kind of feel like a late add to this conversation.
Right. And it's so hazy as well that it doesn't make a ton of sense. So that brings me to the last one, which is KOC just likes having a lot of quarterbacks on the roster. At one point last year, they had Darnold and McCarthy was hurt. They had Daniel Jones. They had Nick Mullins. I mean, they had all kinds of guys on that team. And perhaps he just thinks it's valuable given that he has 2 tackles in the bag. They just reconstructed their interior offensive line for better or worse through free agency. And you have 3 excellent wide receivers and a tight end that you trust just to load up on every quarterback you can have in the building at a good price, which I think given Rodgers took pay cuts, last year and the year before to make space for the Jets, it would probably be a reasonable contract coming in with the Vikings or any veteran quarterback. And it just sets you up well to continue playing well, I suppose. So that's kind of the 2 options that I think. Number 1, that maybe McCarthy has something we don't know about with the injury, or number 2, KOC is just a lot more aggressive at the quarterback position than the league would expect. Now, aggressiveness towards, a guy who has questionable locker room.
That's the thing. What are we being aggressive about? Right. But even the locker room, okay, that's a point, right? Like that's something that's a lot to metabolize in a locker room. And by the way, that was one of the things that jumped out at me the most last year was how that locker room chemistry just popped. Every single post-game locker room speech where KOC would go in, it was like that felt like the vibes were the kind of vibes that make a late postseason run. They didn't do that, right? Like, so I was off, but it felt very like the Carolina Panthers when they went to the Super Bowl. That was one of the things that we took away from like their season and their chemistry. That was just all clicking. They had the right guys. And that was one of my biggest takeaways about the Vikings last year is they all seemed to like really enjoy playing with one another. They had a good group of guys. It just feels weird. It feels weird. But then again, what are we being aggressive about from a football standpoint? Because this is where I can't get over. He did not play well last year. He did not. Okay, let's pretend like the Achilles was the whole reason and it's a little bit better and he's going to be better than he was last year. Well, then like, what are we actually looking at? Even like how much better? Because they did everything in New York to build the offense around him. He had so much power. We know that. If his Achilles was a problem, by the way, and you made this point, I think last week, like if it was, then he didn't do a good job of not calling his own number and having self-awareness about what his limitations were. He put himself in the positions that he was in and didn't have success in. So I just am confused about like where the Giants are concerned and the Steelers, I can talk myself into a lack of other options.
Right.
And just we have to have a quarterback. And so even if it's a low level quarterback, maybe we bet on the fact that it's going to be better for him this year than it was in New York. But you're still like what's the ceiling there? Okay. But supply and demand. Vikings have a supply unless they don't. Like we have an option here with JJ. We have kind of some buy-in from the fan base that this is where we're going and that we're going to build around this. I don't get it.
I wonder if KOC has like trauma from the year where Cousins went down and he just had to throw guys all over the table onto the field.
Yeah.
Which like brings up a strong point about Kirk Cousins too, because it feels like the Falcons are kind of doing this as well. Obviously less off the field stuff there, but they just allowed a roster bonus to hit for Kirk Cousins. And I'm wondering if we are shifting into a realm where I don't want to call the Vikings a mid-tier team because they spent a lot of money and they have a lot of very good players, but these teams, these teams that have premium offensive assets in particular are just going to be substantially more aggressive or substantially more asset hoarding at the quarterback position moving forward, regardless of the price or the off the field implications and so forth and so on.
I think I could talk myself into Kirk Cousins, even though it did not look good at all last year.
Right.
But I could talk myself into putting him in that room, even if he's not the guy, even if he doesn't want to be there. Kirk Cousins is a guy who's going to get on board and he's going to support Michael Penix. And I don't know if I can talk myself into that for Aaron Rodgers. And maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe Aaron Rodgers would be a great teammate who would support a younger quarterback from the sideline. I don't know that we've had any clues in his behavior that would indicate that that's the truth. And so if it's just, I just want like a whole stash of guys, I could think of other guys that I'd rather have. I'd like to start that stash with, that are still available even in some cases.
And you bring up a great point as well about Rodgers, which is like, he didn't pull the reins back a little bit. And so looking at Kirk Cousins, that offense looked completely different once it was clear that Cousins couldn't get the job done in the pistol kind of outside zone play action sets that Zach Robinson wanted to run down there in Atlanta. And when Penix came in, it completely changed the look of the offense. That was not really the case. It looked like an Aaron Rodgers normal offense, and it looked like he just couldn't do it, particularly after the time to throw got over 2-3 seconds. It looked like he just didn't have that juice anymore.
It's the word self-awareness is kind of one that has been coming up a lot. I think in the last few months. I think Mark Dominic made a point about Caleb Williams. And it did not go over well with the Chicago Bears fans, understandably. but I think the point that he was making is an interesting one, whether you agree with, how he got there or not, just about self-awareness in general. And that being something that particularly for a quarterback, you're kind of looking for a degree of it, because then you understand how malleable they'll be in certain situations. Like if it all hits the fan, can you go in a totally different direction? Like, can you take the coaching? Can you take criticism? Can you do all these different things? And I have just seen a lot of signs in the last few years that maybe the self-awareness is not what, you would ideally want for somebody to check all of those boxes I just mentioned where Aaron Rodgers is concerned. And so I just keep going back to that, even, the fact that it's taking so long and
right.
I don't know.
Something just hit my brain.
Okay.
And we haven't talked about this, but you brought up Mark Dominic, and I was like, I didn't necessarily agree with that take. And I'm thinking about the structures. And if you recall, the Cleveland Browns, when they had Baker Mayfield, had an excellent offensive line and excellent running game. That being said, they still ended up moving on from Baker Mayfield, despite the clear latent skills that Baker Mayfield had. I'm wondering if that couldn't be a potential number of the distribution for Caleb Williams, because now they've invested in this offensive line. And if he isn't mature enough, as Mark Dominic laid out, which I don't really know if I buy stock in, but if it just doesn't work out for whatever reason, despite the investment in the offensive line and the head coach and so forth and so on, it really is a very similar situation to that Baker Brown situation, where he's a guy who can kind of play some backyard football. Maybe he bounces around, goes to another place. I don't really know if you have any comments on that, but it is like an interesting progression that I hadn't considered prior to until you brought up Mark Dominic's comment.
I was thinking about Baker earlier today too, and the fact that he's had success on a second team, when I was thinking about a lot of the back and forth that we have also talked too much about, I think, with regards to Shedeur.
Right.
Because I think I do, to a degree, agree with you that maybe it's all gone too far with Shedeur. I think my general thought about Shedeur is not that he cannot have success in the NFL or that he is a built-in bust or anything like that. It's that the way people are talking about him, that are evaluators, when they watch the tape, the concerns that they have, the questions that they have, the way
Right.
that they talk about him, they talk about a lot of question marks, and they don't talk about him in a way that you would ideally want someone to be talking about a quarterback if you're going to use a top 5 pick on. And I think that if you go that early, the expectation is so different than if you are Bo Nix, even though Bo
Yeah.
Nix, I think, went way higher than most of us expected him to go. But I think part of what we're able to do when we watch Bo Nix as a rookie, he didn't pop in any statistical categories, right? Like, you go look at EPA and CPOE and all that kind of stuff. Bo Nix is like right there toward the bottom.
Right.
So you can't find something where you're like statistically like, holy shit, that hit. But he looks like it'll work, right? And I think that our frame of reference and our starting point, based on where our expectations were out of the gate, are that it's easier to exceed the expectations we have for him, I guess is what I'm saying. So it feels like, okay, they got that one right, even though there's less evidence to that for other people. And I think that's where I'm coming from with regards to Shedeur Sanders. When people talk about him, he feels like somebody that would be set up better, and the team would be set up better if they used a later pick on him. And I fully understand, like, if you need a quarterback and you're picking in the top 5, it's not like you could just be like, well, I didn't have the 25th pick, so I can't take him. I understand that. I just think that the expectations will be different. We've seen that with Baker, where it flamed out. We are seeing that so far with Caleb, and that there's a chance for it to turn around, but it's different. It's just different.
I think you bring up a great point, which, as I was writing the piece and I was considering what I wanted the piece to be, what the mock draft, which is on SumerSports.com right now, to be, I deeply considered this from the kind of political point of view, as you noted. And I think Baker and Caleb are very similar to Shedeur in this manner. They had similar kind of like off the field type preview talks from the media in general, and teams allegedly as told through the media. And the idea that a quarterback invites media versus is the more totem pole, the guy on the front of the stadium, but, cool faced, not necessarily like inviting any questions or anything like that, does change the reality of being a evaluator, coaching that player, and what would end up happening to you at any given point in time. So like a team like the Titans, for example, let's say they did draft Shedeur, the horse and pony show is coming to Nashville as a result. And they're going to have an immense amount more of coverage just because they would draft him at 1 or 3 or wherever they could draft him. And that, especially given they've been through multiple head coaches and general managers in the past couple of years, would put a lot of pressure on a front office. And why I decided to pull the trigger on the Shedeur stuff was because I thought we just were missing some of the research. But long hours into the night, my dad was helping me edit my grammar, and we were talking about that. And should we consider the research, or should we consider the reality, as you highlighted, of the off the field stuff, for better or worse? Even if he played average, or even if he was a near offensive rookie of the year and a playoff quarterback, as Baker was, it may just not matter to a certain degree. And I think that is definitely something. It's going to be there, research or not. That's real life. Like, the media will be there. There's data that shows what happens with Colorado when the Sanders came to town, and what obviously you can predict to happen when they go elsewhere. And so it's something that has to be considered, even though it's not on the field. And as, quote, evaluators, as football people, we like to keep it on the field, but there is more to the evaluation, certainly.
You know what else there is with the Baker comp is that he was a surprise one. Like, at the last minute, remember, he was not a guy that people were talking about going first. And then there was some late buzz that they liked him the best out of the options. And then we knew he was going to be one before, but like, he was one, and it was kind of a surprise that was not consensus necessarily. And I wonder if that's not part of it too, is like when you doubly set yourself up by doing the thing that enough people are kind of like, oh, I liked this other guy better. And I think we kind of saw that a little bit with Bryce and CJ, right? Like it put the Panthers, and thank God for them that they were able to, or he was able to turn that around last year, or they, because it was doubly worse. Not only was he not working out, but oh my God, look at CJ Stroud, who, by the way, in year 2, not a great year 2. So that kind of dulls that conversation to a degree also. Anyway, I think the whole thing's really, really interesting. We're going through pro days right now, which are interesting in another
Speaking of
way.
research.
Oh my God. That whole man, that was a roller coaster. Was that yesterday? I feel like all the days blend together where Tet McMillan is concerned in his 40 time. And for like hours, the football world thinks he ran a 4.48 40. And then, a few hours later, it comes out that like pretty much everybody else has him at like mid 4.5s, which is a little bit closer to what we expected. And that is a wild difference.
Right.
4.48. Like that's what I can't get past, is that like assuming that Jordan Schultz, like I'm sure, talked to a scout like who actually had time on him. Like where'd we get this 4.48? Was there a scout that was ready to go back to his team and say 4.48? And then we have like a full, like, what is that, a 1/10 of a second? Like that's a big difference from everybody else. How does that happen?
Man, this is
You're like,
as soon as I saw the secondary reports, I was just like, oh man, if I'm an agent, why am I letting my guy do this? Especially given you're the wide receiver 1. And look, I don't know who his agent is, and I'm sure there were reasons. I'm sure there were teams that asked him to do it. So like, I'm making a broad
what do you
statement
mean? What do you think was questionable that he do?
I just don't know why you would run a 40 in a pro day setting ever. If you want to understand,
to not running it at all, or running it at the combine,
not running it at all, or if you're going to run it at the combine, where it's
they're faster. The hand times are faster. So if you run at your 40, you are going to get a better time. That's what all of the
you're putting yourself in like you're putting your whenever scouts talk about it, they're always like, oh, he's a 4.4 guy or he's a 4.5 guy. You're putting yourself literally in that range of error. Like that full range of error.
However,
when it comes to hand timing.
So let's say the range of error can only benefit you. Because let's say, so the hand timing, I did a little Googling yesterday. I'm not a hand timer myself, but apparently there is consensus from people who do hand timing that it's like 0.2 to 0.3 seconds faster, or like the time will show up as that much faster than a laser time. If it's a hand time, because of just the reaction time from like gun to click. Whereas if it's a laser, it literally starts like when the gun goes off. And the fact that, not like anyone's using a gun, but you get what I'm saying. So it's like, go, and then we have to wait to hear the go to react, and then we push. So there's like a slight delay. And so the hand times will actually give you a faster time. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, why does anyone run at the combine? Why? Because if you can go run at your pro day, and let's say you've got a 4.48 and a 4.5 that's going to get out, he doesn't run a 4.48. He runs, let's say the 4.5 is much closer to what we would have guessed that he would have run, right? Based on his estimated 40 time in our tracking data. I don't actually have that in front of me.
He would have been right around kind of the mid range of what was reported, which is that's the error bar.
Probably it. So then you'd love a 4.48 coming out. You would love that that margin of error actually benefit your client, because you're like, yeah, sure, go tell everyone it's a 4.48. Sure.
I think the upside is mirrored by the downside though, which is like what the laser timing places like to say is it's a plus or minus 0.08, which I kind of came around to just like anecdotally by literally like taking my phone and doing like pop, pop, like trying to stop and start at the same time. And I did like 4 times and it was 0.08 both times. And that's like a big difference when it comes to a 40-yard dash in terms of like the percentile. And again, does the 40-yard dash even matter for some of these positions? Maybe not. All that being said, it's just like, maybe just have the university purchase a laser, or maybe someone just bring a laser so that everyone can be on the same page and you can compare within people. Just as like a data scientist, this is like giving me tightness in the chest, because I just can't believe any of it. And there's no consistency. And I think, people, you could have 25 guys there, and because we're talking about a 40 and not like a mile, even if they all agree, they could all, in essence, be, they're all subject to the decline of facilities or the inoperability of the human body, which is like, it's hard to click stuff fast, and it's hard to see stuff and click stuff at the same time, which is what kind of drives me. Like, it makes me like so upset for some of the guys. Now, Ted McMillan's going to be fine. He's an excellent player, extremely productive. There's a lot of film out there on him. But like, what about the special teams guy who has excellent special teams film, even though limited, and teams that are sharper, like the Patriots or the Dolphins and stuff like that at the special teams level, really like him. And then all of a sudden, 3 scouts are maybe not paying attention because they don't really know who you are. And everyone huddles up and they have you at a 4.6, and you're like, you're a 100-meter runner and you can burn or something like that. That's just what gets me.
2 things. One, I still just think that the margin of error is going to benefit you in that scenario. But also, just like the human nature, I think, is you're certainly not going to start it before they start. So I kind of think that the margin of error benefits the runner. Secondly, you mentioned the huddle up. So this is something that people might not know if you haven't been to a pro day. What happens is the scouts are all kind of like at the finish line with their clickers, right? And they all do this, and then you go one at a time, and then at the end they all huddle up, and media is not allowed to be near the huddle, and all of the scouts with somebody who's in charge kind of rattles off like, here's what we had, and then everybody kind of they compare notes so that if somebody didn't get a time, they now have one, and they can kind of see what the consensus is. So if they're like real off, then they kind of probably have an idea of like, how much do I trust this? Or maybe I'll go back and I'll tell my team both versions. I'll tell them what I had and then kind of what was the consensus, but you have a rough idea of what everybody has. So it's not like if you're just sitting there by yourself, you're like, oh, I got this terrible time and this is the one my team's going to have. And that's the only thing that they're going to have access to. Like there's a way that they kind of massage that at the event. But also, when we were talking about this yesterday, you and I were going back and forth, I kept thinking like, I know I've heard so many anecdotes about pro days from pro days past about the people who wait till the pro day that were anecdotally like it was a joke. And I reached out to David Carr because I was sure it was him. I was like, I have a vague recollection of you telling a story about your 40-yard dash being a very casually marked off 40 by your friends that was probably not quite 40 yards. Like that he thinks he might have run like a 39-yard dash at his pro day. Like it was not exactly that. And he texted me back and said 50-50 chance it was exactly 40 yards, but 100% chance it was downhill. So there are ways that people do this that absolutely benefit them as opposed to the other way around. That said, I agree with your point about like, I mean, to a degree, pro days are certainly very important for the people that don't get invited to the combine.
Right.
The people that go to the combine that are like lower end guys, I would say if you're fast, you should definitely run at the 40, despite all of the margin for error, because you need to do it on the big stage where you have everyone's attention, right?
Right. And I think if you're a guy who runs a slower 40, like off the top of my head, I'm thinking about like Malachi Starks, who didn't have a great athletic score. And I'm just talking about the athletic testing all around, but is an excellent, traits guy, prospect guy. A lot of people think that he can really play the safety position really well. At that point, it doesn't really hurt you to run at the pro day because then you benefit from the variance of guys hand timing or using different types of timing approaches or being downhill or running on a curve or something like that. You can benefit from that. So there is stuff to it. It's just like we're getting into the part, Lindsay, where, there's couple different sides for me. You know, sometimes I'm like big wrestling guy talking crazy. And then other times I'm more of like the down the middle, trying to be like a media reporter. And this is like true Data Sam has come out this week where it's like, oh man, the hand timing, not the hand timing, like put a ribbon up or something.
A ribbon. I understand where you're coming from. From a data collection standpoint, it's a nightmare. And so, yeah, I fully understand in that sense why teams would want these guys to all run at the combine.
Yeah, and the irony is like you could get a better reading by like literally having a scout just put his phone up and just go like that and giving it to your analytics guys. Like you could probably get to a better idea that way. So
that's actually a really good point. Like, why aren't we doing that? Like, why are you using a stopwatch right now when you could just tape the person and go back and go start here, end here? How long was it? Sam, you just blew my mind.
Well, I mean, like that's my point about like the hand timing and the insiders and stuff like that. It's like we have pretty simple solutions to this.
How did I not think of that? And then it's almost like having tracking data. Anyway,
exactly.
Big news this week from the Bengals. They got these contracts done with T and with Jamar Chase, both of them getting highly paid. And by the way, props to you for you nailed it. When did you even write this article? You wrote an article predicting the percentage of the cap that their contracts would likely account for. And we're
yes. So this was part of my hot sauce hot takes. And my whole thing was like, this dude is performing as a wide receiver one. I really liked the way that he was contributing. And I liked the dichotomy, T Higgins, and the dichotomy between him and Jamar Chase. And I thought he could be had by any team at about the 9 to 10% of the cap range, which is like a percent of the cap is a lot, but there was a bunch of wide receivers that were in that range from Keenan Allen at the top end to, in particular, the ones that I thought were the ones were Nico Collins and Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith, exact same position, a guy that people would love to have on their team. Is he a wide receiver one? Maybe not, but he could certainly be for several games. And then he's next to A.J. Brown. Nico Collins was in a situation at the time of his signing where he was an analytics darling, but they had Tank Dell. They were bringing in Stephon Diggs, so forth and so on. And thus he slotted in at 9%. So about mid-year, I'm like, I think any team can get him for this much, including the Bengals. And I really wanted him to stay on the Bengals, but I thought he would have been a good fit elsewhere as well. And it seems as if those were the comps that probably were landed upon by the agent and by the team. Now, the structure, Lindsay, is where it starts going downhill for the Bengals. Because
tell me more.
It's like they are a uniquely cash-strapped team. They're not the Eagles who are going to take the cash hit to win now and then maybe dump it later on down the road if they're not in a place where they think they can compete. They're in a place where the money that they spend will be spent and budgeted for this year, and they're not going to want to guarantee money down the way. So you have to pay up for stuff like that. And as a result, you get in these situations where Jamar Chase and his agent certainly know that. And they're like, no. You're going to make me the highest paid player, non-quarterback in the league. Because if you're going to expect me to not take guaranteed money down the road and capitulate to your cash strapness and capitulate to the philosophy of contracts that you have, it's time to pay the piper.
So how does this affect their ability to retain Trey?
So that is where the fun really lies, because now they become a cap managing team rather than we're going to pay the guys this year and then we'll reevaluate next year. Because as a result, you're going to have to probably restructure and guarantee some of the money in different places and turn P5 into signing bonus and so forth and so on for Joe Burrow. And you're probably going to have to do it for guys like Jamar down the road too, and probably for T as well. But that's just like not what we've really seen them do. That being said, we haven't seen them have 3 premium talents in the way that they have now, basically until, I mean, like, unless you consider Chad Johnson and maybe Carson Palmer years and years ago, they didn't really have it like this level of apex talent. They didn't have two guys that could be MVP candidates, including one that could be an MVP candidate at the wide receiver position.
Right.
So that's the first element, is how will they manage the cap? Which, if anything is to be told, they'd want to pay him this year. They're probably not going to pay him this year. It'll have to be something next year, or some type of workaround to give money now, maybe not right now, later, question mark. The second thing is, what is Trey's valuation? Because what was thought to have pulled his valuation up was the Myles Garrett contract and the Max Crosby contract and some of these other edge rushing contracts.
Soon to be Michael Parsons contract. Yeah, all the contracts.
And then also, if you're to believe that the Myles Garrett contract was to be made because to reset the entirety of the non-quarterback market, well, that just got reset by your teammate. And so now what does that start to look like? So I think the deal space for Trey has enlarged since the end of the season, even, where the agent and the team could be far apart. So other than a situation where he just kind of bites the bullet like T. Higgins did this year and just plays, and maybe they figure it out next year or something like that, I don't know if I see the deal space shrinking to a place where it's really fundamentally good for both teams, unless someone does make serious concessions.
What do you think Trey likely is looking at in terms of what his number would be? You've got Max at 35 per, and you've got Myles at 40, and you've got Bosa at 34. And then Josh Hines Allen at 28. So, like, there's a big jump. I mean, relatively big jump there to get to Nick and Max. And then also relatively big jump to get from Max to Myles.
So, I mean, if I'm the agent, I am sticking to, my DPOY 2 or something like that. Like whatever he was highly considered at the awards for the defensive player of the year. I am digging so deep into that, because you literally, there's one of those a year. You can't just go get a player who's done that before. And on the flip side, there are teams who would want to go out and get that. So if I'm testing his value elsewhere, I'm anchored in at that point. If I'm talking to the Commanders about a trade, or I'm talking about another team about a trade, I'm anchored in probably right at or above the Bosa number, even though that's hard to gauge. But this is a team that's like unloading the clip on you and thinks they're bringing you in for a big time. If I'm staying in not Cleveland, in Cincinnati, because I want to continue to be a leader on this team, this is my team, so forth and so on, I can't imagine a way that it's not still kind of in the Bosa range or the Max range, but probably a little less, or maybe there's a concession here or there. But man, I mean, that's a big deal space that you just said, 28 to 40. I mean, that's like multiple players. Like, if you could sign him at 30 and you could still go use $10 million on multiple other contributors on your team. So it's like a real sticky situation. It's a real strange market. But I mean, the 30 to 35 range seems like the deal space, and $5 million in the NFL is a big range, especially for the Bengals.
So the way that deals work in the NFL is next man up gets more. Like, right. I get not going to Myles Garrett's number, but I would be surprised if his representative was willing to go. Well, Max Crosby's 28, Trey 31. So you have age on the side of Bosa and Max. I don't know. I just think I'd be surprised if it's under those numbers, or at least enough. Like 30. I don't think you're having a conversation at 30.
I agree.
Just because Myles just got 40 and he's 30. So I just think just by the nature of the way negotiations always go, it always gets more expensive. Which brings us to another conversation, and that is, do we need to be talking about the Bengals the way we talk about the Cowboys? because the Cowboys have established a pattern of kicking contracts down the road, and then they always are on the hook for the biggest possible number at the last possible second. And I feel like the Bengals have clearly done this too. They did this with Jamar. I mean, Jamar's number did not, he even made that comment during the season about, like, if I want to become the highest paid and I want to beat Justin Jefferson's number, I'm not going to beat him by a penny. I'm going to beat him by a lot. He beat him by a lot. He went like way up over him. And so he got way more expensive by kicking this can down the road. I'm sure you can say the same about T, just because, you know, where he fits, he's being paid like a high-end one. And I mean, you could argue that he is, and they just have two, but this feels like mismanagement to me.
Yeah, it comes down to, you know, how much cash you want to spend and how you want to manage the cap in any given year. And that you basically have two options, which is spend a lot of cash and your cap is really low, and you can manage it in many different ways, or don't spend any cash. And then, like, you don't have to be as active with the cap, and you don't have to do as much strange things with the cap. And the Bengals are a team that just, like, year over year do not want to spend a lot of money and are really strapped with what they can do in any given year. And to a certain degree, like, that's how the Cowboys operate too, quietly. Like, you look at 2024, 32nd in the league in active cash, Cowboys. Now in any given year, this can change, but you want to smooth it out a little bit. But it's really tough. It's tough to do in any given year.
All right, that's the Bengals, and we'll wait for some clarification with regards to Trey Hendrickson. I went on a Commanders podcast last week and suggested that I would be okay if I were them specifically giving up a 1 for Trey Hendrickson. I know that's a high price. My argument kind of is looking at the roster and all the things that they've done to clearly go get it now. Like, that's obviously where they're thinking. They're thinking now, and not in like a sacrifice the future for now type of thing. I don't necessarily agree that that's even a thing, because the way, like, the Rams have proven you can flip a defense, you know, and like I think you can adjust quickly, the way the Commanders turned around from one year to the next last year. So I don't think it's necessarily that, but I think that if they're making these moves that are already like, we're here to go win a Super Bowl next year, the year after that, that's what we're building for, then I think if you're going to give up, what is their pick again? It's late 20s, 29.
Yeah, late 20s.
So if you're giving that up in terms of what you would draft at the edge rusher position, I'd rather give up. And I know that there's money also that you're going to have to go in for. I would rather give up that pick and bring in Trey and know that it's hit. Know that I'm getting exactly what I'm getting, and that is production at the highest end. And there's enough history that even though he's old, says the 49-year-old woman about the 31-year-old man, even though he's older, that there's enough history where we can see production coming out of him for 3 to 4 years, unless he's like, you know, but it happens.
Right. And just to lay kind of the groundwork, Lindsay, of what that trade-off may look like, is you're probably going to have a 2 to 3 year timeline on a move like that, and how you're evaluating it, especially given you will probably have to extend Trey Hendrickson, which will probably end up being functionally a 2 to 3 year extension.
Yep.
And as we discussed, that's going to be somewhere between 31, 32, 33, up to $37 million. So that's, and a first round pick, which I think, if I'm remembering correctly, you can value that at about $7 to million-ish in terms of say. I'd have to like go back and look at some of the figures, but it's going to be substantially less than a $30 million player, like in expectation in the draft. There's going to be a lot more uncertainty. However, as a result, it's going to be a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And so, like, to put a name to a face here, I have them going with Nick Emenwari out of South Carolina to replace Jeremy Chin, who is very similar to him athletically and in play style. In Trey Hendrickson's I would be floored if Nick Emmanwori ever even got close to winning a Defensive Player of the Year. So it basically comes down to the distribution of the player plus the limitations put on you by spending so much money. Particularly, it'll probably end up being this year in terms of cash. How do you value those two? And I think what it really comes down to is how they value the O-line market if I'm the Commanders. Because that's a team where if I'm going to invest draft capital, I want to invest it in front of Jaden Daniels.
I like that. Yeah.
And so if they feel like, you know what, we can get two guys in the 4th and 5th round, and we have them tiered pretty much the same as, you know, on day 2 or at the end of the day 1, maybe you look at that, or maybe, and perhaps you on draft day, you trade back from 1 and trade a 2 and, you know, get a little additional draft capital and try to figure it out. There's a bunch of different ways that it can be done, but I think that is the trade-offs that you're thinking in your head of what would the expected value be of the 20-ish to $25 million extra that we would have. Could we really get a player like this out of it? Could a player that we draft, you know, on the O-line, Gray Zabel or Donovan Ezeraku or some of these other players, could they end up providing more value in like 3 years based on expectation? It'd be hard, but maybe you truly believe it. And so I do think, as you and Thomas have said, it probably the market probably will squinch up a little bit more as we get closer to the draft for Trey Hendrickson.
I was playing around in some wide receiver numbers yesterday, as one does for fun. And I found some interesting notes here that I want to talk about with you, because I think one of the big free agency moves that was made last week has to do with DK Metcalf. One of the things that popped up when I was looking around, the numbers were deep ball rates and the top 5 wide receivers last year in deep ball rate. Let me read to you the top 5 guys. Alec Pierce, 43.5%. Yep. That's insane. Okay, George Pickens is number 2 with 29%. Josh Palmer, that surprised a lot of people, 27%. DK Metcalf was 4 at 25.9, and Calvin Austin was 5th with also 25.9. So you've got 3 of the top 5 guys in deep ball rate. And this is not deep ball success. This is the number of times, like out of their targets, how many of them are deep balls is, you know, a quarter of the time.
Right.
And more for George Pickens. We're throwing 20 yards or more to these guys last year. What does that say to you about the Steelers for next season, considering those are their dudes? And what they should do at the quarterback position and why it maybe shouldn't be Aaron Rodgers. I'm just kidding. That's just my part.
I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of Arthur Smith, 12 personnel, play action and chunk it deep. And that's what they found a module of success with Russell Wilson last year. Like, I'd actually be okay with them bringing back Russell Wilson. I think it makes sense given their team.
But this, if they're both there and this is what we're working with, I 100% agree.
Yeah. And then I wonder if a guy like Jalen Milroe, who has a rocket arm and is just an absolute project, but Mike, we've seen Mike Tomlin be able to build these guys up into something at other positions, not necessarily at the quarterback position, but he fits that mold. And so I'm just wondering, the answer to the question is the ball is going to be flying. Like, it's going to be going long. And there's going to be real athletes going up and get it, whether it's Calvin Austin, who's a track star, or it's DK and George Pickens, who are absolute, you know, excellent athletes at that position and outstanding size-wise as well. So I think that's the forecast. I think it's going to be raining deep in Pittsburgh. It's just a matter of who's throwing the ball and whether the wide receivers themselves can make the plays that need to be made in spite of whoever that quarterback may be.
And by the way, like, he's a fascinating wide receiver because of his size. The fact that he can have success on those go routes, like that you're sending DK Metcalf long at this stage of his career, which is not like, but I mean, at that size that he can outrun people is kind of wild, right? But he last year, and I think that we could have a conversation about DK and how we evaluate what kind of wide receiver he is right now. I don't know that we're either. I don't want to speak for you. I don't necessarily think that highly of him if the conversation is wide receiver ones. Like
Right.
in terms of giving him a big contract and expecting a lot from him, I think he's a lower end one, in my opinion, maybe like mid to low, like in that type of range. But he is pretty good on the go routes. Matt Harmon, who runs Reception Perception and charts wide receivers, and please go subscribe to his site. I can't tell you how much I love it. He runs go routes at a high rate, and he had a 62.7% success rate on those. That's a good number. Our conversations, we've had a lot of them about DK lately, because in our Sumer score metrics, he on the individual components of his game doesn't necessarily grade out that well, right? Like in terms of his route running, in terms of his yards after the catch, plus minus, not ideal. But then his overall score is actually the highest score that we have for him. And so we've been going back and forth. And I say this all the time, that all of these numbers require context. All numbers do, right? Like you have to be able to dig deeper than that. They are not the story in and of themselves. They point you to where the stories are. So we've had conversations about how does that story develop? How is his best score his overall score when the components of that are not? And so we've wondered, is it contested catch? Is there something that's happening that we're not accounting for? Which I also think is a fun thing here at Sumer, because we can go, oh, maybe we need to create a metric for this if, we're not seeing something pop up there. And to look out for that in years to come. But Matt Harmon has specifically pointed out that he is not good on contested catches. He had a 40% success rate on contested catches last year, which is obviously not good, like sub 50%, right? So I just think he's an interesting guy to try and figure out right now about what kind of wide receiver he is, how he will be maximized in this offense based on the things that he does do well versus not. I want to relay this one quick stat here from Matt Harmon's write-up about him. So he traffics in success rates and charts every play and like the success rate on in each situation. He had DK a 71.3% success rate versus zone, which is not good at all. That's 10th percentile amongst charted wide receivers in the database at Reception Perception. Here are some seasons in the same range as that. 2020 Jalen Reagor, 2019 Devontae Parker, and 2 Alan Lazard years.
Those are the last two names really hit me because that's the downside. I mean, that's what happens if he falls off a cliff is Alan Lazard and Devontae Parker. So it's an interesting investigation. DK is like a true detective problem because he's not running great routes. He's not getting a lot after the catch. Was it Geno? Was Geno doing a great job? Yeah, Geno had an excellent completion percentage over expected last year. So good there. Can we recreate a scenario where that occurs in Pittsburgh? I don't know, but could it be different because the offense is more structured around 12 personnel? Maybe so. Maybe it's not going to be, these 11 personnel, Ryan Grubb-esque situations, or maybe the routes will be different. And so I really love what Matt Harmon does. I had Corey Kinnon on my podcast. He works with him as well, because it's the moments where the eye meets the AI and we can really come together and put numbers on stuff and then postulate on the great theories of football and what's happening and what the eye says. And it's really the only sport where we can really do that, where there's theories about what is occurring rather than, oh, he's not shooting threes, or, oh, he's not hitting the ball well. Well, thanks. Why not? But the team building essence is interesting. And I'm interested in what the Steelers will look like weeks 1 through 4, because if they have a true answer to that, oh yeah, he's going to be running 9 balls. We're going to get the ball out to him late, but we're also going to have a bunch of guys taking out the underneath, and Freiermuth and Darnell Washington are going to be a problem for linebackers next year. And that's why he's going to be successful. Fantastic. we're going to be running a lot of heavy play action, and DK's a pretty aggressive blocker. We're going to put him in alignments where he's probably going to look like he's blocking, but all of a sudden he's taking off. Very interesting. So I love this stuff, Lindsay. I think it's so fun.
Me too. Me too. I think you and I are aligned, and I think it's interesting. Like, we come at this from different places in terms of our backgrounds and the prism through which we look at these things. But I think both of us really like the detective work and trying to figure out the answers before we know them. Harmon does point out in his write-up that Arthur Smith's offense usually uses the X receiver, AJ Brown, Drake London, in a way where they run a lot of slants, digs, and posts. And those are some of the routes that DK can still run effectively. Like, his slant route success rate last year was 83.6. Slants, what did I say again? It was slants.
Digs, post, those in breakers, huh?
Okay. Yep. So dig, 78.4% success rate, and post was 69.2. So that's not bad. That's a little bit more like in the average range, but digs and slants, those are both pretty good. So it might just be that it's a good fit for the things that he is still okay at, and that they might do in some of the ways that you described a relatively good job, or be a good landing spot in terms of hiding the things that he's not good at anymore. Speaking of a wide receiver who is not good at a few things anymore, I also wanted to talk more about Cooper Kupp, because he has been a guy that I think is an interesting. So now he goes to Seattle, and why were they so like out on him? Like, he was never going to return to the Rams. And I mean, I live in LA. I'm friends with a lot of Rams fans, and there was a lot of like, I hate the lack of loyalty and that kind of stuff. I was like, yeah, but you also are going to love when they've upgraded the position next year and you're winning games as a result. So I kind of get both sides, but you and I highlighted back at Super Bowl the decline in Cooper Kupp's play. And could you reiterate real quick for anybody who's listening that is unfamiliar what the drop off was from 2023 to 2024 for Cooper Kupp?
Yeah. So the thing with Kupp is he is a toolsy guy and had been excellent at beating coverages and route running for multiple years, including the years where he was an all-pro and won a Super Bowl and all this stuff. And then at the end of last year, maybe due to injury, maybe due to aging, maybe due to the fact he's playing a new role, or
I mean, ankle injury that he was dealing with. So
it just began to decline, leading to this year him just not seeing a bunch of production when it came to our advanced analytics, when it came to our Sumer scores. And it really kind of mirrored the way that they approached him in the late season, where it felt like they needed him to make 2 or 3 big catches a game. But outside of that, there weren't a lot of opportunities coming his way. And it kind of hindered him, even though they were one play away from, I guess, going to conference championship, potentially going to the Super Bowl. But that's kind of the decline that we've seen. And so the question, as he's now a Seahawk, is how are they going to use him, given it seems as if he's going to be in emotion a lot. It feels like he's going to be in a similar role, maybe just as, not across from an absolute supernova like Puka, and maybe JSN can be that guy, but it feels like he's going to be in motion a lot. And it feels like they're going to want him to do a lot of things that I know you have some data on that he hasn't done super well.
Yeah. So let me back up really quickly, because I think it's interesting that our data told a story of a steep decline last season. Mm-hmm. And again, as you pointed out, and as I always want to highlight, maybe there's more to it, right?
Exactly.
I think our first clue that there wasn't more to it, and that the data was telling a story that we were onto something, was the Rams' disinterest in bringing him back. Right. The team that knows him the most. Okay. Then I reached out to Matt Harmon. I value his opinion so much, and then went to his site and read his write-up to see like where we were in alignment, or the way that he does his charting, the stories that he found. And I found that a lot of them kind of just confirmed a lot of the things that our data suggested. First of all, he pointed out that he's a guy who's always struggled to win versus man, and particularly at the beginning of his career was very bad against the press. But the Rams did a really good job of scheming him away from press, and he's a great zone beater. Had
Right.
a 91.4% success rate against zone in 2021. That is off the charts good. He is elite, was elite. Okay. His slant, so then this past season, 2024, his success rate versus zone fell from, again, that 91 percentile in 2021 fell to a 76.2% number success rate. That's 30th percentile.
Yep.
His man and press success rate percentile this past year, which I already mentioned, not his strength anyway, fell to the 3rd percentile. His slant, curl, dig, and post route success rates in free fall compared to his peak. He was last year in space on a career low 19 catches in Harmon's 2024 sample and was brought down on first contact on 68.4% of those plays, which was a career high. And then there's this. They used him differently. So all of this, and they were already starting to have to account for these things in how they were using him. He took 87% of his snaps off the line of scrimmage. Reception perception, again, this is like a commercial for their site, has charted wide receivers for 11 seasons. And they say they've only seen 8 wide receivers take more than 85% of their snaps off the line of scrimmage. They're all slot players: Jordan Matthews, Kiki Cutie, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jarvis Landry, Golden Tate twice, Jamison Crowder, and now Kupp.
Yep.
So there is a lot of evidence now, right? Our numbers, his charting, Cooper Kupp, not the same player. So what does that mean for Seattle? To the question that you brought up, his hands are still good.
Mm-hmm.
Keep him close to the line of scrimmage, and he's probably still a good security blanket option.
Mm-hmm. Does
this mean that JSN needs to be outside more frequently? Because
it's a great point.
Are you putting Kupp, inside in the slot, and now JSN we need to see him in a slightly different way than he's been used before? Have JSN running end breakers and Kupp running out breakers? And so I think that that's an interesting part of the trickle down of this conversation.
This just inspires so many questions about team building too, because let's just focus on the Jackson Smith and Jigba discussion. We were shocked about the wholesale changes that the Seahawks seem to be making to their team, despite it making sense with them moving from Ryan Grubb to Clint Kubiak. But now in the draft, could a third wide receiver be of interest in the second round if Luther Burden or someone is available at that range? Like there's so many additional questions that are inspired by mixing the subjective data quantified that Matt's put together versus the objective data, the physics of the game subjectified through our metrics coming together, then applied to a depth chart. And it's like beautiful. The more questions that I want to ask, what are they going to do at the other wide receiver spots? How are they going to run the ball? How are they going to expect Jackson Smith and Jigba to come inside and block if they're going to be moving them all around? Or is he just going to be an old school X receiver? Cooper Kupp, he's getting up at there in age. Can he play physically at that level as well, if that's what they're going to want to do? Or would you have to thus keep him too far outside? And so there's so many interesting questions, particularly with the Seahawks offense. And then laying on top of that is, under the radar, Mike McDonald basically created an entire new way of teaching defense. Perhaps does he try to bring that to the offensive side of the ball? Are they doing new things? Are him and Clint Kubiak going to come together and try to innovate on the offensive side of the ball? It's going to be really interesting to see what they do.
Another component to this numbers story where the Seahawks are concerned, Tyler Lockett popped up in a sample of, we like to make jokes about sacrificial X receivers, right? Like just going deep and then like essentially getting cardio. It's not just X receivers. There are receivers. Last year, I decided to do a little digging about who were the sacrificial lambs, so to speak, at the wide receiver position. There were 6 wide receivers who ran 500 plus routes and saw less than 100 targets in 2024. Trey Tucker. We need that's like a separate story about Trey Tucker. This dude ran 616 routes and was targeted 81 times. That's a 13% target rate, not target share, target rate. Out of the routes that he ran, he was targeted 13% of the time. Andre Yoshivas.
Yes, that was the one you took it away from me. I had that one off the top of my head.
Oh, that sucks, because as soon as you reacted, I was like, oh, this is a fun game. I should have you guess who the other ones are.
Yeah, so Yoshivas was one that I picked up early on in the year.
An 11% target rate.
Dude,
11.
it was outrageous. And so early on in the year, I was like, this guy has fantasy juice. T. Higgins is hurt. Yes. He's a pretty good red zone player. He wasn't popping in any of our metrics, so I didn't think he was going to be a target earner. But I thought that he was going to be a guy I could keep on my fantasy bench and throw in at any given point in time, and you have a touchdown or a big play or something like that. And this dude was just out there loving ball. Like, he was just running around, and then they would put in some tight ends and they throw it to the tight ends. Yeah. And then T. Higgins came back and they were throwing it to T. Higgins. And my guy was just out there keeping the uniform clean.
Andre Yoshivas sound like he's the tight end? Like, there's nothing about that name.
He's a Princeton
wide
guy.
Receiver.
Princeton guy.
I don't know. It's like if you just threw me the name and you just
I'm so glad you brought that up.
I would have said tight end.
I was like, I had it on the tip of my tongue, and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna come in, I'll wrap everything up with the Cincinnati Bengals in a nice, pretty package. And Lindsay, you're just so well researched that, you know, me just like pulling stuff off the top of my head that. I mean, I that one in particular, I knew was true, but it just popped in my head. But you have the full list, and so
do you have any other?
You know, we're on the same
throw
page.
Out any other names? Because I said there's 6. There's 6 who fell into this category.
Man.
So we've got Trey Tucker. We've got Andre Yoshivas.
Was it Tolbert from the Cowboys?
Yep, he's next.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not from a percentage standpoint, but in terms of, like, I'm going down the list of like routes that they ran. And he ran 535 and was targeted 79 times.
Maybe I do know a little bit more than I think I know. You know, I'm just like my brain is retaining information that it like in the role that I have, that I've been blessed to have. It obviously is helpful, but
I'll give you a clue about one of them. One of them just re-signed. Within the last week. No.
Tutu Atwell?
That's a good guess. No.
I don't know.
No. He hasn't run this many routes. Darius Slayton.
Oh, yeah, good one. Because Wandale.
3 years, 36.
Yeah, because Neighbors and Wandale were getting like 15 targets a game at one point. Sorry, Stopsky.
501 routes, 71 targets. Tyler Lockett is another one, which was why I segued to this off of the Seahawks. He ran 522 routes and was only targeted 74 times. That's the same target rate as Darius Slayton, which is kind of wild, right? For like Tyler Lockett, in terms of the way that we perceive him in the fantasy space, even, and understanding that it wasn't, but like, that's a lot of routes for not a lot of targets. Which brings me to a question. The last name is Ray McLeod, which I was a little bit surprised by, because he actually he was, at least maybe his targets last year resulted in catches. Like, he felt like he was actually a viable fantasy option quite a few times. And so I was surprised that the rate of targets was that low, but 533 routes, 87 targets. So let me go back to the question and why I want to bring this up. When you have a low target rate, but you're on the field that much and you are running routes, does that say something to us about you as a wide receiver? Why are you not being targeted that frequently? Like, are you not winning? Are you not getting open? Or is that just who you are in the offense, maybe? And like, they're like, go out there and, you know, draw some defense away from, like, what does it say?
I mean, like, let's do I think off the top of my head, there were 2 buckets that they went in, and they all had to do with target earners. And so the first group is Yoshivas, Tyler Lockett, and who was the last one you said?
Ray.
All 3 of those teams had 2 target earners, DK and JSN, and Drake London and Mooney, and to a certain degree Pitts as well. And then now I can't even remember the second one, but all of those had like, Higgins and Chase, obviously. And I think the reason why Yoshivas was on the field so much was because Higgins missed like 6 or 7 games, right?
Yep.
And so when that did occur, they went to a much heavier personnel package where they bring in like 3 tight ends until Eric all got hurt. Which brings me to my second one, which is like the teams that play around with their personnel, but have one guy who they're feeding targets with, and that's why they're moving everything around. And that would be Brock Bowers and the Raiders and Trey Tucker and CD and the Cowboys with Jalen Tolbert.
Well, Brock and Jacoby Myers, who they went to a lot last year.
Yeah.
Does it tell us anything about, so if you're the Raiders and you're looking to bring in a pass catcher this offseason, you've got Bowers and you've got Jacoby and you've got Trey. I've kind of maintained that I love the idea of like a power slot guy in that offense, like almost build it out kind of like the Lions and have those 2 guys sort of inside, like, get your Amon-Ra. They don't grow on trees. I get it. And then you've got Brock Bowers as the Sam Laporta. And then you've got 2 guys on the outside. And I think Jacoby's more than fine. And then I don't hate Trey because he can take the top off. And like, I think he brings stuff to the table here. Do I need to reevaluate whether or not Trey is a viable guy to have in that role based on him not earning more targets? Or do you think that that's not a concern with him? We don't have to upgrade, that it's just a product of the offense.
I don't know. It's such a great question because as I was going through my mock draft, you run into all these little problems of like, do they adjust the scheme or do they adjust the personnel? And I think we've seen that change many times. Like, for example, the Saints were in a similar situation where they had really only 2 wide receivers, and then both of those guys went down, and they end up being a heavy run team, but their running actually wasn't all that bad. And so I think there is an element of your coach's skill that pops up here, and your ability to adapt, and an ability to build an offense for a team and for players that has to be considered here because, Jalen Tolbert could be an excellent wide receiver, but in the context of CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson and Dak Prescott, maybe he's better used in other ways.
That's a great answer. Love it. Only 3 wide receivers ran more routes than Trey Tucker last year. Jamar Chase, Jerry Jeudy, Garrett Wilson. I'm going to leave you with that note because
some people just love playing football. What can I say?
What? Or like getting cardio. Like he's just going to like his endurance and he's going to be in very good shape. Like,
look, so Lindsay, so when I was in college, I had torn my ACL. I couldn't play my first year, and rehab for your ACL is miserable. And so I come back, didn't know if I was going to continue playing, ended up playing. And my sophomore and junior years, I didn't feel like I had a good chance to play because one year I was like way too heavy. I trying to gain weight to like really play at linebacker or maybe on the edge as well. And does not work for my body. And the other one, I was way too light. And so my parents were asking me like, oh, you got all this other stuff going on. Like, you got good grades. Why don't you go do something else? And I was like, Mom, you know what? I just love football. And that's what my guy Trey Tucker is saying on a daily basis. You don't got to throw me the ball. Let me run these guys off. I'll cash my checks, but I love running. I love football.
Yeah. I mean, yes, you pay me at an NFL rate, I will do whatever, right? Like to a certain degree. Sam Bruchhaus, always fun. I have enjoyed this conversation today. Kind of free flowing, going in a bunch of random different directions.
Yeah, this is excellent. We're getting out of the hustle and bustle of the draft season, and now we can kind of we can get the pot a rolling simmer until we get back into the draft, and we can really investigate some of these things and some of these moves that these teams have made, which is really exciting.
Yeah, we're deep in draft season now. Now that free agency is like, a week in the rear view mirror, we're going to have a handful of moves here, there. They're probably going to be quarterback related. Other than that, probably not what much will move the needle outside of like a trade, a trade.
Yep.
Right. We'll definitely, but other than that, like we get to dive into the draft, something that you do on your Draft FM podcast, something, which if you are not already a subscriber to, go subscribe to that. You can find it, wherever you get your podcasts. And also Sam put out a mock draft yesterday. And you can find links to that at SumerSports.com. Also on Friday, if you have a SiriusXM, you can tune into SiriusXM NFL Radio and you will hear us. That's at 7:30 Eastern. Am I right with the time, Stopsky? And we will be with Thomas Dimitrov, 7 Eastern. Good thing I asked. 7 Eastern. You can find us. That's channel 88 on the SiriusXM platform. And that will be Sam and me and Thomas Dimitrov.
Mhm.
They're talking about the draft. And I think we're going through offensive line this week. Is that right? We're going to go position group by position group. That is correct.
Starting with my favorite of the draft and probably the best of the draft.
Well,
Offensive line group.
a really interesting group because I think we're seeing some movement there at the top. I think I'm starting to see a lot more Mimbo.
Yeah.
Mimbu.
Yeah. Well, the crazy thing with those guys is
you're like, I don't know.
Oh, with like,
right
man, you know what? I haven't seen Dane's Beast Guide yet, so I'm not up on my pronunciations yet. I gotta wait. I gotta lock it in, and then all of a sudden, you know, the guys in particular, like the folks from Utah, typically like the Polynesian or some Samoan guys, then I'll be locked in on their names. But Dane, you gotta help me out, brother. I need those pronunciations. We asked him on our show. I was like, how do you get those pronunciations? He's like, do a lot of phone calls, man.
Yeah. Pronunciations are important though. Like, I think it's great that you noticed that and gave him props for that because that is an undervalued resource.
Immensely. And just imagine, like, particularly at the end of the draft, there's some points in which you're trying to convince a guy and his agent to allow you to take him because the undrafted free agent market allows a little bit more freedom. And so, you know, if calling that guy and pronouncing his name right gets you some brownie points, why not study up on it?
Great advice for the people in the 32 front offices that are looking to do that in about a month or so now. We're getting closer to the draft. Thank you so much for being with us today on the SumerSports Show. We'll see you again next week.